Wyoming Territory, 1883. Dust swirled in the dry wind as the stagecoach creaked to a stop in the middle of nowhere, the driver spitting a wad of tobacco and jerking his thumb toward a crooked sign nailed to a post. "Camp's there," he grunted. "This is where your letter said, miss." Delphia Orwood stepped out carefully, her boots sinking into the soft dirt. Her gloved hand clutched the handle of her worn satchel, the other holding a folded letter now soft with rereading. She looked around. A few cabins scattered against the foothills, a corral with a single mule and a campfire burning low. No welcome party, no man in a suit with roses like she had imagined. Nothing but scrubland and sky. She took a breath. "This is the right place?" she asked again. The driver shrugged. "Letter says North Camp near Tangle Creek. This is it. Good luck to you, Miss Bride." He tipped his hat and climbed back aboard. Delphia stood there as the coach rattled away, dust rising behind it like a curtain closing. She waited. And waited. By sunset, no one had come. She sat beside the fire, chewing the last of her jerky, heart sinking. She had answered an ad for a mail-order bride, a widowed rancher named Thomas who lived near Tangle Creek. She had nothing left in Boston. Her parents gone, her brother lost to illness, and no money to her name. This marriage was supposed to be a new start, but now it seemed she had been dropped in the wrong place. She did not cry. She just sat quiet, arms wrapped around her knees, staring into the fire. If she was wrong, maybe someone would find her. If she was right, God help her. A horse snorted behind her. Delphia turned fast, heart leaping. A rider approached from the trees, tall in the saddle with a rifle slung across his back and a hat pulled low. He dismounted with a quiet ease, his boots stirring the dirt as he stepped into the light. "Ma'am," he said, voice deep and steady. "You lost." Delphia stood. I might be. I was supposed to meet someone, a man named Thomas, near Tangle Creek." The cowboy's brow furrowed. He was young, maybe 30, sun-browned skin, strong jaw covered in a short beard, eyes the color of stormy skies. "There's no Thomas here," he said. "No one by that name for miles." Her fingers tightened around her satchel. "The driver said this was the North Camp." "It is," he replied. "But the only rancher up near Tangle Creek is Thomas Carter. He died last winter." Fever took him. Delphia swayed where she stood. The cowboy stepped forward on instinct, catching her elbow gently. "Easy now." She blinked up at him. "Then I came all this way for nothing." He looked at her for a long beat, jaw ticking. "Name's Zane Shepard. I have a small spread due west." "You cannot stay out here alone. Come back with me." Delphia hesitated. "I do not know you." "No," Zane said. "But you sure as hell cannot stay here by yourself." Something in his eyes steadied her. No pity, just a quiet kind of surety. She nodded. He helped her onto his horse, then swung up behind her. The ride was long and silent. Dusk melted into night, and she leaned back just slightly, the warmth of him behind her easing the cold in her limbs. At last they reached his homestead, a low wooden cabin, a barn, a small fenced pasture. A flicker of light showed through the window. Inside, the cabin smelled of wood smoke and clean pine. A fire crackled in the hearth. Two small beds sat near the wall and a rocking chair faced the flames. Toys lay scattered across the floor. Zane cleared his throat. "You will have my room." "I will take the floor." She stepped forward, confused. "This is your home," he nodded once. "Mine and my children's." A little girl peeked around the corner. Bare feet, long dark braids, eyes like her father's. A smaller boy clung to her nightdress, chewing his thumb. Delphia's breath caught. "You have children?" He knelt beside them. "This is Sadie. She is 6, and this fellow's Samuel. He is 4. Their mother passed 3 years back." Sadie tilted her head. "Who is she?" "A lady who needs a place to stay." The girl looked Delphia over. "She is pretty." Delphia smiled faintly. "Thank you." Zane led the children back to bed, then returned with a blanket and pillow. He set them on the floor near the fire. "I am sorry I pulled you into this," he said, "but I could not leave you out there." Delphia looked around the little cabin. It was worn but full of love. She glanced at Zane, who was kneeling to unroll his bedding. "Do you think it is foolish?" she asked quietly. "Coming across the country for a man I never met." Zane looked up. No, I think it is brave. Her throat tightened, but she nodded. Thank you. For not leaving me behind. He gave a short nod. Sleep well, Delphia. That night, Delphia lay beneath his quilt staring at the dark ceiling. She listened to the fire, to Samuel's soft breathing, to the wind outside, and to the steady breath of the man who had found her when no one else had come. She did not know what tomorrow would bring, but somehow she did not feel lost anymore. The dawn came pale and cold, slipping through the chinks in the cabin walls. Delphia sat up slowly, the quilt drawn tight around her shoulders. The room was quiet except for the soft creak of the rocking chair. Zane sat there, boots unlaced, staring into the low flame, his face unreadable in the dim light. I didn't mean to take your bed, she said quietly. He didn't look over. You needed it more, she rose, smoothing the bedding with careful hands. I ought to earn my keep while I'm here. I can sew, cook, clean. You're not a hired girl, he interrupted, standing. You're a guest. Rest a few days, then we'll talk. I've rested enough, she said, firmer than she meant to. Zane turned then, rubbing at the back of his neck. All right, if you're set on it, the chickens need feeding. Coop's behind the cabin. She dressed quickly and stepped outside, the air sharp against her cheeks. The coop was patched in places, the latch stiff with frost. Inside, the hens clucked and shifted as she scattered feed, their movements oddly comforting. She lingered there, watching her breath rise in the cold. By late morning, Sadie was kneeling beside the hearth, stringing buttons onto a scrap of twine. Delphia knelt beside her, helping untangle a knot. Papa don't like folks fussin' over him, the girl said without looking up. But he don't stop him either, Delphia smiled faintly. That's so, Sadie nodded. He fixed the school roof last fall even though no one asked him. Miss Lynette baked him an apple pie for it. He gave it to the preacher. Delphia tied the knot with a careful tug. Sounds like he's not one for thanks. He don't keep much, Sadie said. But he keeps us. Later, while Zane hauled water from the spring, Delphia stood in the lean-to beside the barn, sleeves rolled to her elbows, scrubbing the children's laundry in a wooden basin. The soap stung her chapped hands, but she didn't stop. The rhythm steadied her. Zane passed by with the bucket, paused, then set it down. You don't have to do that. I know, she said. But I want to. He watched her for a beat, then stooped to help without another word. They worked in silence, sleeves damp, steam rising from the basin. A jay called from the trees. When the last shirt was rinsed, Zane wrung it out and hung it beside the others. You didn't flinch when I said my wife was gone, he said, not quite looking at her. I know what it is to lose someone, she said. I know how it looks when folks pity you. Zane nodded once. Most women would have turned tail at the sight of two young-uns and a half-broke homestead. I wasn't most women when I boarded that coach. He studied her for a long moment. You married before? No, she said. Nearly once. He chose a banker's daughter instead. Zane's gaze lifted to hers, steady and quiet. His mistake. She didn't answer, but something in her chest loosened. That evening, while the children played with whittled animals near the stove, Delphia stirred a pot of stew. Zane sat nearby, mending a leather strap with practiced hands. You always wanted this life, she asked. I wanted land I could call mine, he said. Didn't figure it'd come with goats and cough syrup and spelling lessons. Do you miss town life? Never had it, he replied. Left Missouri young, been out here ever since. She tasted the stew, added a pinch of salt, then glanced back. You ever think on marriage again? He set the strap aside. Only when I look at Sadie and Samuel and think how they need more than I can give. Delphia turned the spoon slowly in the pot. And you, Zane met her gaze. I reckon I've been too tired to think on what I need. They said nothing more after that, but when the children were asleep and the fire burned low, he handed her a folded quilt without a word and gestured to the rocking chair. She sat, tucking it around her legs, and he sat across from her. Outside, the wind moved through the trees, and in the hush of the cabin, something settled between them, not promise. Not yet, but the faint shape of belonging, like the first line of a song neither of them knew the tune of, but both already understood. The next week unfolded in small, quiet pieces none of them planned. all of them necessary. Delphia patched a tear in Samuel's woolen blanket with careful stitches, her needle moving in time with the ticking of the mantel clock. Outside, Zane chopped wood with steady swings, his shirt damp at the back by midday. Neither of them spoke often, but the space between them no longer held the same stiff unfamiliarity. On the 6th morning, a letter arrived by rider from the settlement post. Zane handed it to her without a word, then stepped outside with his coffee. The envelope bore her name in the same neat script she'd memorized during the long ride west. Her breath caught as she opened it. The handwriting inside was different. A woman's. She read in silence, lips pressed tight. When she folded the paper and slipped it beneath the bread tin, her fingers trembled slightly. Zane returned, wiping his hands on a rag. "Bad news. My intended sister," she said, voice level. "She only just found my reply." Thomas passed before he ever read it. Zane leaned against the doorframe. "You already knew he was gone." "I didn't know I was never expected." He nodded slowly. "You still planning to leave?" Delphia met his eyes. "I haven't decided." They didn't speak of it again that day. But that night, when Samuel stirred crying from a bad dream, it was Delphia who crossed the room and lifted him from his bed. She held the boy against her shoulder until his breathing slowed. Zane watched from the shadows, his face unreadable. The next morning, he offered her a place beside him on the wagon bench as he drove to the upper pasture. The trail climbed through pine and snow grass, the wheels creaking beneath them. She didn't ask where they were headed. He didn't offer. They stopped near a dry creek where winter had left driftwood tangled like bones. A small herd of cattle grazed nearby, ribs showing under heavy coats. Zane pulled a sack of feed from the wagon bed and handed it to her. "These were my brothers," he said. "He went east 2 years back to work rail lines, never came back for him." She scattered feed in silence, watching the cattle nudge each other for space. "Why'd he leave?" she asked. "Didn't take to the land like I did," Zane said. "Didn't take to staying." Delphia looked toward the hills. "I never thought I'd find steadiness on the edge of nowhere." Zane glanced at her hands, raw where the wind had cracked them. "You don't scare easy." "No," she said. "And you don't ask questions you don't want answers to." He let out a breath. "You plan on marrying again?" She didn't answer right away. "I don't plan anything anymore, I just keep going." They loaded the wagon in silence, then drove back down through the trees. The wind had picked up, tugging loose strands of her hair. Zane handed her his scarf without looking at her. That evening, she took the children out behind the barn with a tin lantern and showed them how to trace animal tracks in the frost. Sadie asked questions with quick curiosity, and Samuel tugged her hand when she crouched too long, whispering that the dark made him itchy. From the porch, Zane watched them. He hadn't asked her to do it. She hadn't asked if she should. Later, when the children were asleep and the cabin quiet again, Delphia lingered by the hearth, one hand on the rocking chair's back. "I could leave," she said softly. "Catch the next coach east. Take a job in a boarding house or a dress shop." Zane looked up from where he sat on the floor, oiling a boot. "You could," he said. "I'd be safe," she went on. "I'd have a roof. I could send letters. I'd have order." Zane set the boot aside. "But not a fire like this one. Not children who lean on you and smile in their sleep. Not a man who sees you even when you don't speak." Her throat caught. "You see me." He stood slowly, rough hands wiping on his trousers. "Every day since you stepped down from that coach like you'd already survived something no one had the words for." She looked at him across the room, the air between them gone still. "I wasn't expected here," she said, "but you claimed me." "I didn't plan to," Zane said, "but you fit here." "So I did." Delphia stepped closer, her voice quiet. "You're not a man who says things he doesn't mean." "I've never wasted words," he said. "Then don't start now." He reached for her hand, calloused fingers curling around hers like he'd known the shape of them in some long-forgotten dream. "I won't," he said, and in the hush that followed, she stepped into the space beside him where the fire's warmth reached and the past no longer held dominion. Neither of them said the words. They didn't need to. The choice had already been made. In the following days, the rhythm of the homestead began to shift subtle, but certain. Zane noticed it first in the way Sadie started saving her drawings to show Delphia before him, and in how Samuel reached for her hand when the wind howled at night. Delphia, for her part, took to the land without fuss or flourish. She listened more than she spoke, and when she did speak, it was with purpose. Her presence settled into the house the way spring crept into the folds of winter, gradual, quiet, impossible to miss once it was there. On the third morning after the letter, Zane returned from checking the fence line to find Delphia kneeling by the hearth, sleeves damp, coaxing dough into shape on the floured table. She didn't look up. "You patched that gate near the elk wallow?" she asked. He set his gloves on the bench. "I did. Was the post still sound?" "Mostly. I'll brace it before the thaw," she nodded, dusting her hands. "There's coffee if you don't mind it strong." Zane poured a cup, leaned against the counter. "You ever bake in that Boston boarding house?" "No," she said. "But I used to watch the cook when she wasn't looking. She'd hum when the bread rose right." He sipped, then set the cup down. "You've a good hand for it." Delphia gave a faint shrug. "I like the way it feels. Starting with nothing and ending with something warm." He didn't answer, but the weight in his chest shifted. That evening they sat outside while the children played near the edge of the porch. The sky stretched wide and coppery above the hills. Zane rested his boot on the step, arms loosely folded. Delphia watched the wind carry a hawk high above the treetops. "I've been thinking," she said after a while. He turned his head toward her. "If I stay," she continued, "I don't want to just be a guest or a burden you're too kind to send away." Zane didn't speak. "I want to belong," she said quietly, "but I won't pretend I know how to make that happen." He studied her face the way the light touched her cheekbone. "Belonging doesn't come with a list. It comes with showing up, doing right by each other." Delphia glanced down at her hands. "You think I've done right by you? You've brought steadiness to this place," he said. "To them, to me." She looked back up at him, eyes steady. "Then I'd like to stay." Zane's voice was low. "Not just till spring," she shook her head once. "Not unless you ask me to leave." He reached across the space between them, his fingers grazing hers. "That's not something I'll ever ask," Sadie called from the yard, and the moment passed like breath into air. But later that night, as Delphia folded the children's quilts and Zane latched the shutters, their eyes met across the room. No words passed between them. None were needed. 2 days later, Zane hitched the wagon and told the children they were riding to the trading post. Delphia sat beside him on the bench, her hair braided tight against the wind. The road there was long and rut-carved, winding past the river's edge and through stands of lodgepole pine. They stopped once to let the mule drink, and Zane pointed out a spot where he'd once seen a bear cross with its cub. At the post, Delphia traded eggs and a pair of knitted mittens for a bolt of calico and a tin of pepper. Zane lingered by the barrel of nails, speaking briefly to the owner while the children picked out a handful of horehound sticks. On the ride back, Samuel fell asleep against Delphia's lap while Sadie counted hawks overhead. As afternoon faded, they reached the homestead. Zane unhitched the mule while Delphia carried Samuel inside. When she came back out, he was still at the fence, checking the latches. "I want to build a room off the back," he said, not looking up. "A proper space, for you." Delphia stepped closer. "I don't need it." "I know," he said. "But I'd like to give it." She touched his arm lightly. "Then we'll build it together." Zane looked at her then, the kind of look a man gives only once when he's sure. "You ever wonder if you waited at the wrong camp on purpose?" he asked. She smiled, small and certain. "I think I waited in the only place I could be found." And beside the fence, with the sky growing softer and the wind carrying the smell of pine and earth, Zane reached for her hand with quiet finality. Not with urgency, not with doubt, but with the steadiness of a man who knew the shape of home when he stood in it. The first snow came late that year, falling soft and steady through the dark with no wind behind it. Morning brought a white hush over the land, and the sky hung low, pale as milk. Zane stood at the window, watching the flakes drift, his hands wrapped around a mug Delphia had warmed beside the stove before he'd risen. She was near the table, separating dried beans by color into an old flour tin. Sadie helped, serious in her concentration, while Samuel poked at the window pane with a stick, tracking the snow's descent. "You ever seen snow this light?" Zane asked, voice low. Delphia nodded. "Once, back in Vermont, it came just like this." "My father said it was the kind that stayed." He turned to her. "You want it to." She didn't look up. "I don't mind things that stay so long as they're worth keeping." He crossed the room and set his mug down. "Come with me. I've something to show you." She bundled in her shawl and they slipped out the door, leaving Sadie in charge with clear instructions. The children had grown used to a household where everyone had a share in the keeping of it. Trust had taken root naturally, like breath. Zane led her past the barn, across the pasture where the snow clung to the fence rails. They moved quiet, boots making soft prints in the white. Near the edge of the property, he stopped. A stand of aspen trees marked the boundary, their trunks pale and smooth. There, half-built but sturdy, stood the frame of the room he'd promised. Delphia froze, breath rising in little clouds. "You've been working on it alone?" she asked. "Only in the early mornings. Figured I'd surprise you once it was done, but—" He shrugged. "Didn't want to wait." She stepped forward, running her fingers along the beam. "You notched these by hand." "Used the draw knife my father left me. Took some time to find it again in the shed." She turned to face him. "You built this for me." He looked at her straight. "I built it for us." She blinked once, then smiled, not quick or shy, but full, like something that had been warming for days and finally reached the surface. "I'd like to make curtains," she said. "With the calico from town." "You can have any cloth you like," he said. They stood there together in the snow, the half-built room between them like a promise already partly kept. That night, while the wind picked up and swept the drifts against the walls, Delphia tucked Samuel into bed and lingered beside him longer than usual. He'd grown quieter lately, watching her with a solemn sort of attachment, as if still deciding whether her place here was real. She brushed his hair back gently. "You sleep easier when you know someone's staying, don't you?" He nodded, thumb still in his mouth. "You can rest now," she said. "I'm not going anywhere." When she returned to the main room, Zane was setting a log on the fire, the flames throwing shadows against his face. She crossed the space between them and laid her hand on his arm. "I want to be your wife." He didn't move. "I don't need papers or rings," she said. "Not first, I just need you to say the words." He took her hand in both of his. "I want you beside me, Delphia, not for a season, for good." She nodded, her fingers tightening in his. "Then let's make a life." They married with Sadie holding a bouquet of dried thistle and Samuel carrying a small carved cross Zane had made from pine. The preacher came from the settlement, bundled in sheepskin and grinning through his beard. There was no crowd, no music. Just the four of them, a sky full of pale light and the hush of snow all around. Delphia wore a dress she'd let down herself, hemmed to her boots. Zane stood in his Sunday coat, his hand steady in hers. When he spoke his vows, it was with the same quiet certainty he used when mending fences or holding Samuel through a fever. Afterward, they sat at the table. Eating stew Sadie had helped stir and bread Delphia had risen before dawn. There was no need for speeches or songs. Everything had already been said, day by day, in the way they'd held each other upright. Weeks passed, and the house settled into a rhythm that felt old and right. Delphia taught Sadie to stitch a clean seam and read from the old Bible Zane's father had left behind. Samuel grew bolder with her, laying his head on her lap while she peeled potatoes or drew pictures for the hearth wall. Zane spent more time in the evenings indoors, boots off, listening to Delphia hum while she combed Sadie's hair. He built a proper shelf for her spices and hung her coat by the door beside his. The new room was finished by early spring. Sunlight filtered through the curtains she'd sewn, and the floor held the scent of fresh planed wood. It wasn't grand, but it was theirs. One night, after the children had gone quiet and the fire was low, Delphia stood at the window, watching the moon rise over the hills. Zane came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist. "You ever think it might have gone different?" he asked. "I used to," she said. "But not anymore." He kissed her shoulder, slow and sure. "You brought stillness to this place." She turned in his arms, "And you gave me ground to stand on." They lay that night in the new room with the window open and the wind soft through the trees. The house breathed around them, full of life. No more waiting. No more wondering. Only the quiet joy of two people who had found what they never thought they'd be given: a place to rest, a family to keep, and a love that had grown not from grand declarations but from every silent, enduring choice to stay. They never left that home. And for all the years that followed, through every snow and thaw, every broken fence and mended quilt, Zane and Delphia Shepard lived in the life they built together, rooted, steady, and fiercely loved.